Years is like a landmark, and so we feel like we're going to do something special for it. Better go get ready.
Welcome back to my channel. What started as a quiet, carefully controlled narrative inside Sister Wives has now completely shattered, and the person who lit the match is none other than Mykelti Padron. For years, she stayed in the background, smiling through interviews, choosing her words carefully, never fully stepping into the chaos that fans always suspected was hiding beneath the surface. But now, that silence is over, and what she revealed has sent shockwaves through the entire Brown family legacy. Sitting down for a brutally honest conversation, Mykelti didn't just hint at tension or conflict. She exposed something far deeper, something far darker. She described a childhood shaped by pressure, fear, and emotional control, and at the center of it all was Mary Brown. Not in the way fans were used to seeing her, not as the structured, disciplined wife trying to hold things together, but as someone Mykelti now characterizes as emotionally aggressive, controlling, and relentless in her expectations. According to her, it didn't matter how old you were, how capable you were, or how overwhelmed you felt. If Mary gave you a task, you were expected to execute it immediately, perfectly, and without question. And if you didn't, there were consequences. Not small ones either, consequences that made children feel like they were constantly under a microscope, constantly one mistake away from being singled out. This wasn't just strict parenting. This was a system where mistakes weren't learning opportunities, they were triggers for punishment. And what makes this even more unsettling is how normalized it became. Because when you grow up in an environment like that, you don't always recognize it as harmful. You adapt. You adjust. You convince yourself that this is just how things are supposed to be. And that's exactly what Mykelti did for years until now. But what truly turned this interview from shocking to unforgettable wasn't just the accusations, it was the level of detail Mykelti brought with her. This wasn't vague storytelling or emotional exaggeration. This was precise, specific, and deeply personal. She described a pattern that felt impossible to escape. If you didn't complete something exactly the way Mary wanted, you got in trouble. If you asked questions trying to understand how to do it better, you got in trouble. If you didn't move fast enough, you got in trouble. Every path seemed to lead to the same outcome: criticism, frustration, and punishment. And over time, that kind of environment doesn't just affect behavior, it rewires how a child thinks. It teaches them that nothing they do is ever enough. That perfection isn't a goal, it's a requirement. And even then, it might not be enough to avoid consequences. Mykelti revealed something even more painful. She felt like she was targeted more than the other kids. She couldn't fully explain why, but she felt it in the way she was corrected, the way she was spoken to, and the way she was punished. While other children might slip through with lighter consequences, she found herself constantly in the spotlight, constantly trying to avoid becoming the next problem. And instead of speaking up, instead of telling Christine Brown or Kody Brown, she internalized everything. She kept it inside. She convinced herself that if she could just figure out the right way to behave, the right way to respond, maybe things would finally calm down. But they didn't. Because when expectations are constantly shifting, when the rules aren't clear, and when approval is always just out of reach, the child doesn't grow, they shrink. They become quieter, more cautious, more afraid to take up space. And as Mykelti now looks back on those years, she's starting to understand something that changes everything. This wasn't discipline. This was control. As this explosive conversation continued, the environment in which these experiences were unpacked became just as important as the revelations themselves. This wasn't a casual sit-down or a light-hearted recap. It was a deep psychological breakdown hosted on the PopSych platform by David Colorasi, a specialist known for analyzing reality television through a behavioral lens. And that context changed everything. Because what Mykelti was describing wasn't just personal pain, it was a pattern. A pattern that, when viewed through psychology, started to make chilling sense. David pointed out something that hit like a punch to the chest. Children who internalize pain rather than express it often become the easiest targets in high-pressure environments. They don't push back. They don't create chaos. Instead, they adapt, they absorb, and they try to fix themselves. And that's exactly what Mykelti Padron said she did. She didn't rebel. She didn't lash out. She became hyper-aware, constantly scanning her surroundings, trying to predict reactions before they happened. Trying to stay one step ahead of criticism that always seemed inevitable. But no matter how careful she was, it never seemed to be enough. The expectations didn't just stay high, they shifted. They changed without warning, creating a situation where success was nearly impossible to define. And that kind of instability doesn't just create stress, it creates confusion. It teaches a child that their instincts can't be trusted, that their understanding of right and wrong is somehow flawed. Over time, that turns into self-doubt. Deep, persistent self-doubt that follows you long after childhood ends. And as David listened, he didn't just validate her experience, he explained it. He connected the dots between her childhood environment and the emotional patterns she's still unpacking today. Because when a child grows up constantly trying to avoid being wrong, they often grow into adults who struggle to feel right in any situation. And suddenly, what fans thought was just family tension started to look like something much more serious, something that may have shaped not just one child, but an entire generation within the Brown family. And then came the moment that shifted everything from disturbing to deeply heartbreaking, a single memory that Mykelti Padron says never left her. She was around 7 years old, sitting at the dinner table with her siblings, in what should have been one of those ordinary, forgettable family moments. Kids laughing, teasing each other, sticking their tongues out, nothing unusual, nothing harmful. Just childhood in its purest form. But according to Mykelti, what happened next turned that simple moment into something she would carry for the rest of her life. Mary Brown told the kids to stop. They didn't, because they were kids. The behavior continued, playful and harmless. But then, suddenly, Mary snapped, and instead of addressing everyone, she singled Mykelti out. Not the group. Not the behavior. Just her. She was told she was done. Done eating. Done sitting at the table. Done being part of that moment. She was removed while the rest of the children stayed behind, continuing their meal as if nothing had happened. And imagine what that feels like for a child. To be isolated, confused, and punished more severely than everyone else for doing the exact same thing. Mykelti described sitting alone afterward, curled up, hearing the laughter from the table, hearing the voices continue without her. That kind of isolation doesn't just hurt, it imprints. It creates a moment where a child starts to question their worth, their place, and their identity within the family. And what makes this even more haunting is that Mykelti says she doesn't remember much else from that time in her life. Large parts of her childhood feel blank. And she believes that's because of trauma blocking, a defense mechanism where the brain suppresses painful memories to protect itself. The fact that this moment survived while so many others didn't speaks volumes. It wasn't just a bad night. It was a defining one. A moment where something shifted internally, even if she didn't fully understand it at the time. And now, years later, she's finally putting the pieces together, and what she's uncovering is changing everything fans thought they knew about this family. Just when it seemed like the revelations couldn't get any heavier, Mykelti Padron peeled back another layer, and this is where the story takes a truly unsettling turn. Because according to her, the strict rules and harsh discipline weren't even the most damaging part. What left the deepest scars was the emotional cycle that followed. A pattern that didn't just confuse her as a child, it reshaped how she understood love, trust, and self-worth. She described how after intense moments of anger, after being yelled at or punished unfairly, Mary Brown would suddenly shift. The same person who had just been harsh and critical would become apologetic, soft, even affectionate. She would say she was sorry. She would promise things would be different. She would invite Mykelti out for special one-on-one time, girl dates, bonding moments that made her feel chosen, valued, and important. And for a child who had just been torn down emotionally, those moments felt like relief. Like finally, something was being fixed. Like finally, she was being seen in a positive light. But that relief never lasted. Because somewhere in the middle of those good moments, something would shift again. A small comment, a tiny mistake, something barely noticeable, and suddenly, the anger would come back. And not just anger, but confusion. Because what Mykelti describes next is something far more complex than discipline. She explains that somehow, through conversation, through pressure, through emotional intensity, the situation would flip. The blame would shift. And instead of questioning what had just happened to her, she would find herself apologizing. Apologizing for things she didn't fully understand. Taking responsibility for emotions that weren't hers. Feeling guilty for simply existing in the wrong way at the wrong time. And over time, that pattern does something dangerous. It teaches a child that their reality isn't reliable. That their feelings can be rewritten. That even when they are hurt, they might still be the problem. And that kind of conditioning doesn't disappear, it stays, shaping how trust and relationships are built in the future. And as Mykelti Padron continued to unpack this pattern, it became clear that what she experienced wasn't just strict parenting, it was something far more psychologically complex. A cycle that many experts would recognize instantly. Tension, explosion, apology, affection, and then back to tension again. Over and over, without end. And the most devastating part is how effective that cycle can be on a child. Because those moments of kindness, the apologies, the attention, the one-on-one time, they create hope. They make the child believe that things are getting better. That maybe this time, it will be different. That maybe they've finally done something right. But then, when the cycle repeats, the child doesn't blame the system, they blame themselves. They think, I must have done something wrong again. And that's exactly what Mykelti described. She wasn't questioning the behavior around her, she was questioning herself. She began to feel like being in Mary Brown's presence was something she had to earn. Like attention was a privilege, not a right. And at the same time, she felt fundamentally flawed. Like no matter how hard she tried, she would always fall short. That combination, feeling both grateful and unworthy at the same time, is incredibly powerful. And incredibly damaging. Because it creates emotional dependency while destroying confidence. It keeps the child coming back, trying harder, hoping for approval that never fully comes. And what makes this even more heartbreaking is that Mykelti didn't realize what was happening while it was happening. She didn't have the language for it. She didn't have the awareness. She just lived it, internalized it, carried it quietly for years. Until now. And now that she's finally stepping back and looking at it from a distance, she's starting to see the pattern clearly, and that realization alone is powerful enough to shake everything she thought she knew about her past. As the interview pushed forward, Mykelti Padron dropped another revelation that didn't just add to the story, it confirmed what many viewers had quietly suspected for years. This wasn't an isolated experience. This wasn't just one child interpreting things differently. According to Mykelti, a large number of her siblings have chosen, as adults, to distance themselves from Mary Brown entirely. And not because of petty disagreements or personality clashes that developed later in life, but because of what they experienced growing up under her authority. Think about that for a second. Multiple children, raised in the same environment, coming to the same conclusion independently. That doesn't happen by coincidence. That happens when there's a shared pattern, something consistent enough that it leaves a lasting impression on more than just one person. Mykelti made it clear that not every sibling has completely cut ties. Some still maintain limited contact. Some still hold on to hope that things can change, or at least be acknowledged. But the majority? They've made a conscious decision to step away, to protect their peace. To create distance from a dynamic that once made them feel small, controlled, or emotionally unsafe. And that kind of decision isn't easy. Walking away from a parental figure, especially one who played a role in raising you, requires a level of clarity and conviction that doesn't come overnight. It comes from years of processing, reflecting, and finally accepting that the relationship may never be what it should have been. Mykelti also showed a level of emotional maturity that caught many people off guard. She didn't stand there and label Mary as purely evil or beyond redemption. Instead, she acknowledged something more complex. She said she doesn't believe Mary is a bad person at her core, but she does believe she made harmful choices. that she engaged in behavior that caused real damage. And while she hopes Mary finds happiness in her life, she has also accepted that she won't be part of that happiness. That boundary is firm. And sometimes, that's what healing looks like, not reconciliation, but distance. But just when it seemed like the focus would remain on Mary Brown, the conversation took an even more complicated turn because Mykelti Padron revealed that another major relationship in her life is now fractured as well. And this one might be even more emotionally layered. She opened up about her growing distance from Robin Brown, the wife many fans believe changed the entire direction of the family. But Mykelti's perspective isn't as simple as blame. It's filled with confusion, conflict, and painful realization. She explained that she doesn't fully know whether Robin intentionally targeted her when she entered the family, or whether their connection started from a genuine place of care. Because at the time, Mykelti was vulnerable. She was struggling emotionally, trying to navigate her place in a complicated family dynamic, and dealing with the lingering effects of everything she had already experienced. And then Robin appeared, offering support, attention, and what felt like a safe space. For a young girl who felt misunderstood and overlooked, that kind of connection can feel life-changing. And Mykelti admitted something that makes this situation even more heartbreaking. She's not sure she would have made it through that period of her life without Robin's presence. That's how important that bond felt. But now, years later, she's starting to question everything. Was that support genuine? Or was it strategic? Was she being helped or was she being positioned? Because as she looks back, she realizes she was often placed in the middle of conflicts, acting as a messenger, carrying information between family members, delivering messages that caused pain, especially to her own siblings. And that realization is devastating, because it means that while she thought she was helping, she may have actually been used. Not maliciously, maybe. Not intentionally, maybe. But used nonetheless. And now, as she tries to separate truth from manipulation, she's doing the only thing she feels she can do, creating distance. Not out of hate, not out of anger, but out of the need to finally understand her own story without someone else shaping it for her. As the interview reached its final stretch, the focus shifted once again, but this time, it landed on the man at the center of it all, Kody Brown. And what Mykelti Padron revealed wasn't explosive in the same way as the earlier accusations. It was something quieter, heavier, and in many ways, more heartbreaking. Because instead of anger, what came through was disappointment. She described the father she grew up with as someone completely different from the man viewers see today. Someone fun, energetic, charismatic, the kind of presence that made every gathering feel alive. That was the version of Kody she remembers. That was the version she still holds onto. But over time, that version started to fade, replaced by someone more defensive, more reactive, more distant. And the question that's been circling the fanbase for years, what happened to him, was finally addressed in a way that felt grounded, not speculative. Mykelti didn't point to one single cause. Instead, she described a buildup. Years of public scrutiny, endless criticism from viewers, the breakdown of multiple marriages, the growing distance between him and his children. One by one, those pressures stacked on top of each other, slowly reshaping his personality. And when you look at it like that, it's not a sudden change, it's a gradual unraveling. A man watching the life he built begin to collapse in front of him, with cameras capturing every moment of it. And while that doesn't excuse his behavior, it does explain the transformation in a way that feels painfully human. Because anger doesn't always come out of nowhere. Sometimes, it builds quietly until it becomes the only thing left visible on the surface. And that brings us to what might be the most emotionally complex part of this entire story, the current relationship between Mykelti Padron and Kody Brown. Because despite everything that's happened, despite the distance, despite the tension, the door isn't fully closed. But it's not fully open either. It's stuck somewhere in between, a place where communication exists, but connection doesn't. Mykelti revealed that her father has made efforts to reach out. He's tried to reconnect. He's initiated conversations. So this isn't a case of complete abandonment. But the problem isn't effort, it's conditions. Because for Mykelti, a relationship with her father isn't something that can exist in isolation. She made it clear that she can't build something with him if he continues to neglect or distance himself from her siblings. She doesn't see these relationships as separate, individual connections. She sees them as part of a whole. And if that whole is broken, then any single piece of it feels incomplete. So every time Kody reaches out, she asks the same question: what about everyone else? What about the siblings who feel ignored? What about the relationships that are still fractured? And that's where everything falls apart. Because while Kody seems to want to rebuild one connection at a time, Mykelti refuses to separate herself from the rest of the family. For her, it's all or nothing. And the irony in that is impossible to ignore. For years, Kody expected his children to accept Kody Brown as part of the package if they wanted a relationship with him. Now, Mykelti is reflecting that same principle back at him, only this time, the package is her siblings. And until he's willing to show up for all of them, she's choosing to hold her ground. Not out of rebellion, but out of principle. Because in her eyes, family isn't something you pick and choose, it's something you show up for, completely or not at all.